I stood at my kitchen window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears I refused to cry. My hands were steady as I dried the same coffee mug for the third time, but inside, everything was shaking. In exactly 2 hours, I would walk into my sister-in-law's Thanksgiving dinner and face the woman who had been slowly, methodically, trying to dismantle my 37-year marriage. And for the first time in my 61 years, I wasn't sure I had the strength to pretend anymore. The mug was one from our honeymoon in Cape Cod, faded now, the little lighthouse barely visible after decades of use. My husband Richard had bought it for me at a tiny gift shop while I was napping in our rental cottage. I woke up to find it on the nightstand with a wildflower tucked inside. That was the man I married. The man who noticed things, who made ordinary moments feel like gifts. When had that man started disappearing? My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Richard. Running late. Picking up Valerie. Her car's acting up again. Meet you at Susan's. Valerie. Of course. I set the phone down carefully, resisting the urge to hurl it across the room. Valerie Morrison, 53 years old, recently divorced, and apparently completely helpless without my husband's constant assistance. Her car was always acting up. Her gutters needed cleaning. Her taxes were confusing. Her dog needed to go to the vet and she couldn't possibly manage alone. She's going through a hard time, Richard had said last month when I mentioned, as gently as I could, that perhaps Valerie could call a mechanic like everyone else. The divorce devastated her. Mark took everything. We should be supportive. Supportive? That's what we were calling it. I finished getting ready, choosing the burgundy sweater dress Richard had given me last Christmas. He'd said the color made my eyes sparkle. I wondered if he even remembered saying that. I wondered if he'd notice what I was wearing at all. The drive to my sister-in-law Susan's house took 20 minutes through the wet November streets. I'd made this drive countless times over the past 3 decades. Birthday parties, Christmas dinners, summer barbecues, baby showers. Susan and her husband Frank had the biggest house in the family, so they always hosted. It had become tradition, expected, automatic, like so much of my life. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, watching the warm light spill from the windows. Inside, I could see people moving around, laughing, hugging. My family, the people I'd spent 37 years building a life with. Richard's brother Frank and sister Susan. Their kids, now adults with children of their own. My own daughter Emily, who'd flown in from Denver with her husband and my 2 precious granddaughters. And somewhere in there, Valerie. Because Susan had invited her this year, explaining that nobody should be alone on Thanksgiving. And wasn't it wonderful that Richard had been such a good friend to her during this difficult time? I grabbed the pumpkin pie I'd made from scratch and walked toward the door. The house smelled like turkey and cinnamon, and the particular warmth of family gatherings. Susan greeted me with a hug, taking the pie and exclaiming over how beautiful it looked. Frank pressed a glass of wine into my hand. My granddaughters, 7 and 5, ran up to hug my legs, chattering about the parade they'd watched that morning. For a moment, surrounded by love and noise and the beautiful chaos of family, I felt almost okay. Then I saw them. Richard was standing by the fireplace, laughing at something Valerie had said. She had her hand on his arm, the casual touch of someone who felt entitled to touch. She wore a cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit, her highlighted hair falling in perfect waves, her figure trim from the personal trainer she'd mentioned at least 4 times during our last family dinner. She looked up and caught my eye. Something flickered across her face, something that might have been triumph, before she composed it into a warm smile. "Eleanor!" She crossed the room, arms outstretched as if we were old friends instead of whatever we actually were. "That dress is gorgeous, so classic, very Diane Keaton." It was a compliment that wasn't a compliment. Diane Keaton. Quirky, aging, no longer the leading lady. "Thank you, Valerie," I said evenly. "Cream is certainly a bold choice for Thanksgiving dinner. Very confident." Richard appeared beside me, kissing my cheek with the automatic gesture of 1,000 greetings. "Ellie, you made it. Sorry I couldn't pick you up." "Valerie's car," I heard. I kept my voice light. "Very gallant of you." "Can I get you another wine?" Valerie asked, already reaching for my half-full glass. "They have that organic Chardonnay you like. Susan got it specially." How did she know what wine I liked? "I'm fine, thank you." "Oh, come on, Eleanor, it's Thanksgiving. Live a little." She laughed, a musical sound that made me want to check my teeth for spinach. You know what they say, wine pairs perfectly with family drama. She was trying to be charming. It would have worked on anyone else. Dinner was announced, and we all moved to the long table Susan had decorated with fall leaves and candles. I ended up seated between my daughter Emily and Frank's wife Martha, who spent 20 minutes describing her new kitchen renovation in excruciating detail. Richard was across the table, next to Valerie. She'd somehow managed to position herself there, and through the entire meal, she leaned toward him, touched his arm, laughed at his jokes. She asked about his work at the engineering firm, remembered details from previous conversations, made him feel interesting and important. I watched my husband bloom under her attention like a flower turning toward the sun, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Mom?" Emily's voice was soft, concerned. "You okay?" "Fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "You seem distracted." My daughter's eyes, so like her father's, studied my face. "Is everything all right with you and Dad?" "Of course." The lie came easily. 37 years this March. We're solid as a rock. But rocks could crack. Rocks could crumble. And sometimes the damage happened so slowly you didn't notice until the whole foundation gave way. After dinner came the dishes and the pie and the football game that the men pretended to care about. I escaped to Susan's sunroom with a cup of coffee, desperate for a moment of quiet. I was 61 years old. I'd been a nurse for 35 years before retiring last spring. I'd raised a daughter, maintained a home, cared for Richard's mother during her final years of Alzheimer's. I'd held my husband through career setbacks and health scares and the quiet grief of his father's death. I'd built a life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And now some woman in a cashmere dress was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. "Eleanor." I turned. Valerie stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from the living room. "I've been wanting to talk to you," she said, her voice low. Privately, every instinct told me to walk away. "Instead," I said. "About what?" She glanced around, then stepped into the sunroom, closing the glass door behind her. The rain had stopped, and the evening sky was turning purple through the windows. She positioned herself against the light, and I realized this was calculated. She'd planned this moment down to the staging. "I'm just going to be direct," Valerie said. "I think you know that Richard and I have become very close." My heart hammered against my ribs. "He's been helping you adjust after your divorce. That's what family friends do." "It's more than that, Eleanor." She turned to face me fully, her expression almost gentle. "And I think you know it. What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what's happening." She smoothed her dress with perfectly manicured hands. "Richard is unhappy. He's been unhappy for a long time," he told me. The words hit me like a physical blow. "He told you." "We talk, Eleanor, really talk, about everything. His hopes, his disappointments, his regrets." She paused for effect. "He told me he feels like a stranger in his own home, that you're so consumed with your retirement projects and your grandchildren and your book club that you don't even see him anymore." I couldn't breathe. The sunroom suddenly felt too small, the glass walls pressing in. "He said," Valerie continued, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy, "that he loves you, but he's not sure he's still in love with you. That after 37 years, you've become more like roommates than partners." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of her." "Does Richard know you're telling me this?" "No, but someone needed to." She reached out as if to touch my arm, and I stepped back. "Eleanor, you're a lovely woman. You deserve to know the truth instead of sleepwalking through a marriage that's already over." "How dare you?" "I dare because I care about both of you." Her voice hardened slightly, the mask slipping. "And because I know what it's like to waste years in a dying marriage. Mark and I should have divorced long before things got ugly. We stayed together out of fear and habit and obligation. Is that what you want? Another decade of pretending?" My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against my thighs to steady them. "What do you want from me, Valerie?" She looked at me with something that might have been genuine sympathy if I didn't know better. "I want you to let me have your husband." The words hung in the air between us, stunning in their audacity. Through the glass doors, I could hear the distant murmur of family conversation, the clatter of dishes being washed. None of them knew what was happening in this room. "Excuse me? Not give him away like property. I'm not a monster." Valerie's voice was almost gentle now, the voice of someone explaining something simple to a child. "But let him go. Stop holding on to something that's already gone. He deserves a chance at happiness in whatever years he has left. So do you, actually. But you're never going to find it as long as you're clinging to a marriage that died years ago." I stared at her. At this woman with her expensive highlights and her yoga body and her absolute certainty that she knew what was best for everyone. At this woman who'd spent months circling my husband like a vulture waiting for the wildebeest to fall. At this woman who'd sat at my Thanksgiving table, eaten food I'd helped prepare, smiled at my granddaughters, and all the while plotted to take my place. Something inside me that had been bending finally snapped. "Let me tell you something about happiness, Valerie." My voice came out low and dangerous, nothing like my usual careful tones. "You think you know my husband because he helped you with your car and listened to you complain about Mark? You think a few months of playing damsel in distress means you understand 37 years of marriage? Eleanor, I'm not finished." The words poured out of me, hot and sharp, unstoppable. "You want to talk about feeling invisible? About being taken for granted? I was invisible long before you showed up. I was invisible when I worked double shifts for years so Richard could go back to school for his master's degree. I was invisible when I turned down the nursing supervisor position 3 times because the hours would have meant less time supporting his career. I was invisible when I spent 8 years caring for his mother while she forgot my name, while she thought I was the maid, while she called out for a daughter-in-law she'd never had because I wasn't good enough for her precious son." Valerie's expression had shifted from sympathy to uncertainty, but I couldn't stop. Didn't want to stop. I was invisible when I stopped buying clothes that made me feel beautiful because there was always something more important to spend money on. When I stopped reading the novels I loved because Richard said they were a waste of time. When I stopped going to the art classes I'd dreamed about because Thursday nights were his poker nights and someone had to be home when Emily needed help with homework. My voice was rising now, 37 years of swallowed words finally finding their way out. And you know what? Maybe I was a fool to think that sacrifice meant something. Maybe I was stupid to believe that the man I've loved since I was 24, the man I held while he wept at his father's funeral, the man whose hand I gripped for 18 hours of labor, the man I nursed back to health after his heart surgery 2 years ago, the man whose dreams I made my own even when they broke my heart. Maybe I was stupid to believe that man would have enough respect not to discuss our marriage with a woman who clearly wants to replace me. That's not fair. "Fair?" I laughed, a harsh sound that didn't sound like me at all. "You want to talk about fair? You came to our house last month. You sat at my dining table, admired my grandmother's china, told me my pot roast was delicious. And the whole time you were planning this, you were calculating how to take my place. And you have the audacity to tell me I gave him away?" I stepped closer to her, close enough to see the subtle Botox, close enough to smell her perfume, something expensive and deliberately chosen. "So here's my answer to your request, Valerie. No, you cannot have my husband. Not because he's property, not because I'm clinging to something dead, but because he's not yours to take. If Richard wants to leave me, if he truly believes our marriage is over, if what we've built together means nothing anymore, he can tell me that himself, like an adult, like the man I married. But he doesn't need you to speak for him. And I certainly don't need you to tell me what I deserve." Valerie's face had gone pale beneath her careful makeup. "I was only trying to—" "You were trying to make yourself feel better about wanting someone else's husband. You dressed it up as concern and honesty and tough love, but really you just wanted permission. Well, you don't have it." I was crying now, I realized. Hot tears running down my face, probably ruining my mascara. But I didn't care anymore. "And you know what else you don't have? You don't have 37 years of knowing exactly how Richard takes his coffee. You don't have the memory of holding his hand while our daughter took her first steps. You don't have the inside jokes from 1,000 dinners or the shorthand that comes from building a life together, one ordinary day at a time. You don't have the scar on your palm from when you cut yourself making his favorite soup when he had pneumonia, because you don't know what his favorite soup is. You don't know that he cries during Hallmark commercials and pretends he doesn't. You don't know that he still sleeps on the left side of the bed because that's the side closer to the door, because 37 years ago he told me he'd always protect me from whatever came through it. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, my carefully applied makeup smearing. I didn't care. So take your cashmere dress and your life advice and your pity and stay away from my husband, stay away from my marriage. And if it falls apart anyway, I swallowed hard, fighting for composure. Then at least it will be our failure, not yours. I turned and walked out of the sunroom, my legs trembling so hard I wasn't sure they'd carry me. The living room was still full of family, laughing and arguing about football, oblivious to the war that had just been fought 20 feet away. I grabbed my purse from the hall table and headed for the door. Mom? Emily caught up with me in the foyer. Where are you going? What's wrong? You look. I need some air. I'll be right back. Mom, you're crying. What happened? Not now, sweetheart. Please. Not now. I made it to my car before Richard caught up with me. Ellie, what's going on? He grabbed my arm gently, turning me to face him. Susan said, you practically ran out. And Valerie looks like she's seen a ghost. I looked up at him. At the man I'd loved since I was barely more than a girl. At the face I knew better than my own reflection. At the person who'd been my partner through everything, children and mortgages and aging parents and career changes and all the beautiful, terrible, ordinary moments that made up a life. Are you unhappy, Richard? He blinked, confused. What? In our marriage. Are you unhappy? What brought this on? Valerie told me you've been talking to her. About us. About how you feel like a stranger in your own home. About how we're more like roommates. My voice cracked. Is that true? His face went through a series of emotions. Surprise, guilt, anger, fear. She told you that? She told me a lot of things, including that I should give you to her. She said I choked on the word. She said you're unhappy, and I should let you go so you can find happiness with her. She said what? His voice was sharp now, loud enough that Susan peered out the front door with concern. She asked me to let you go, to give you permission to be happy with her. I was crying harder now, and I didn't care who saw. And maybe she's right, Richard. Maybe I did disappear. Maybe I have been so caught up in grandchildren and book club and the retirement I thought I earned that I forgot to see you. Maybe I got so used to the way things were that I didn't notice they were changing. Maybe... Stop! He pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me tightly. Just stop! We stood there in Susan's driveway, holding each other while I cried into his shoulder. Somewhere behind us, the front door closed as Susan gave us privacy. The evening air was cold and damp, and I was shivering, but I didn't want to move, didn't want to let go. I need to tell you something, Richard said finally, his voice rough. And I need you to really hear me. I pulled back just enough to see his face. I have been unhappy, he admitted, and my heart shattered. But not with you, with myself. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture of a man trying to find words. I'm 63 years old, Ellie. The firm is pushing me toward retirement. Young hotshots are taking over projects I started. My doctor keeps telling me to slow down because of my heart. And every time I look in the mirror, I see my father staring back at me. He swallowed hard. I've been scared. Scared of getting old, scared of becoming irrelevant, scared that the best parts of my life are behind me. Why didn't you tell me? Because you seemed happy. You had your grandchildren and your friends and your book club and your volunteer work. You built this whole new life after nursing, and I didn't want to drag you down with my midlife crisis at 63. He laughed bitterly. And then Valerie came along, and she listened, and she looked at me like I was still someone worth looking at. His eyes met mine, full of shame and pain. I liked the attention, Ellie. I'm not going to lie to you. It felt good to feel wanted, to feel interesting again. But that's all it was. Attention. A distraction from the fear. He cupped my face in both hands, wiping my tears with his thumbs. I never wanted her. I never wanted anyone but you. I forgot how to tell you I was drowning. We're supposed to drown together, I whispered. That was the deal, remember? For better or worse, sickness and health. I know. He pressed his forehead to mine. I'm so sorry. I should have come to you instead of some woman I barely know. I was a coward and an idiot, and I let someone manipulate my fear into something ugly. She asked me to give you away like you were an old coat I didn't need anymore. Jesus. He pulled back, his jaw tight with anger. She actually said that? She said I was clinging to something already dead, that I was keeping you from happiness. Ellie. His voice cracked. You are my happiness. You've always been my happiness. The problem wasn't you. The problem was that I stopped telling you. I stopped showing you. I got so caught up in being afraid of losing myself that I forgot to hold on to us. I got lost too, I admitted. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being Eleanor and started being just Richard's wife, Emily's mother, Lily and Sophie's grandmother. I stopped painting. I stopped dreaming. I stopped believing I was anyone worth being. When did we stop talking to each other? I don't know. Somewhere between the chaos and the quiet. Between building the life and living it. We looked at each other in Susan's driveway, rain starting to fall again, and I saw the truth reflected in his eyes. We'd both been sleepwalking, both been going through motions, both been too scared, or too proud, or too exhausted to admit that something precious was slipping away. What do we do? I whispered. I don't know all of it, Richard said, but I know what we don't do. We don't let anyone else tell us what our marriage is worth. We don't give up without fighting, and we sure as hell don't take relationship advice from Valerie Morrison. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out wet and shaky, but it was real. Come home with me, he said. Let's skip the rest of this. Let's go home and actually talk, really talk, like we used to. What about Thanksgiving? The family? The family will survive one early departure. He glanced back at the house. And I need to have a conversation with Valerie first, one that's long overdue. Richard. Not now, later. Right now, the only person I want to talk to is you. He kept his arm around me as we walked to his car, leaving mine in the driveway. Behind us, Susan's house glowed with warm light, full of family and noise, and the ordinary chaos of holiday gatherings. But we were choosing something different tonight. Something harder. Something real. We didn't go straight home. Richard drove us to Lake Minnetonka, to the little overlook where he'd proposed 37 years ago. We sat in the car, heater running, watching the rain pelt the dark water. I want to go back to painting, I said into the silence. I used to be good. Before I convinced myself it was frivolous. You were better than good. You were talented. He turned to look at me. The painting you did of Emily as a baby is still my favorite piece of art in our house. You never told me that. I stopped telling you a lot of things. He took my hand. I want to hear about everything you dreamed about and gave up. I want to know what retired Eleanor wants out of life, not just what she thinks she should settle for. I want to travel. Really travel. Not just the same lake cabin we've been going to for 20 years. Where? Ireland. The countryside. Not just Dublin. I want to see where my grandmother came from. I want to sit in a pub and listen to live music and pretend we're young and adventurous. Let's book it. January, when it's gray and miserable here anyway. Richard, I'm serious. So am I. He squeezed my hand. I've spent 2 years talking about buying a boat I don't actually want. Something about it seemed like what retired successful men are supposed to do. But you know what I actually want? I want to go to Ireland with my wife. I want to hold her hand in some tiny village where nobody knows us or cares about us. I want to remember why we fell in love in the first place. We need help, I said. Professional help. We can't just take a trip and hope it fixes everything. I know. I'll find us someone. A counselor, a therapist, whatever we need. He paused. And I need to talk to someone on my own too, about the fear and the aging and all of it. I've been carrying this alone when I didn't have to. We've both been carrying things alone. Isn't that ridiculous? 37 years together and we forgot how to share the weight. The rain eased to a gentle mist. Somewhere across the lake, lights twinkled from houses full of their own families, their own complicated love stories. I'm sorry about Valerie, Richard said quietly. I should have seen what she was doing. I was so focused on how she made me feel that I didn't question why. She's lonely and scared and saw an opportunity. I understand it. Even if I hate it. You're more generous than she deserves. I'm not generous at all. I said some things to her that I'm not entirely proud of. I paused. Actually, no. I take that back. I'm proud of every word." She needed to hear them. Richard laughed, a real laugh, the first genuine one I'd heard from him in months. "God, I love you. I love you too. Even when you're being an idiot. Especially when I'm being an idiot. That's when I need it most." We sat there until past 10, talking about everything and nothing. About Emily and the grandchildren and whether we should finally fix the leak in the basement. About deeper things, too. Regrets and hopes and fears we'd been too busy to voice. About who we'd been and who we'd become and who we still wanted to be. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a resolution. But it was a start. 3 months later, I stood in what used to be our spare bedroom, now converted into my studio. February light streamed through the windows I'd had enlarged, illuminating the canvas where colors I'd forgotten I loved were merging into a landscape that existed only in my imagination. Richard knocked on the doorframe. "How's it going?" "Good, really good." I stepped back to evaluate my work. "I think this one might be ready for the community art show next month." "That's wonderful, honey." He came to stand beside me, studying the painting. "It's beautiful. You know that, right? You're actually talented." "I'm remembering." I smiled at him. "Slowly, but I'm remembering." "How was your session yesterday?" I'd started seeing a therapist on my own, in addition to our couples counseling. It had been Richard's idea, and it was one of the best things to come out of this whole mess. Hard. We talked about identity and aging and learning to want things for myself again. I set down my brush. But good, hard. Growing hard. "We leave for Ireland in 3 weeks. He grinned like a kid. "I found this little bed and breakfast in County Clare that overlooks the ocean. The reviews say the breakfast is incredible, and the owners have a dog that greets all the guests." "You hate dogs." "I hate our neighbor's dog that barks at 3 in the morning. I like dogs that belong to Irish innkeepers." I laughed and leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. We'd been doing more of that lately. Touching, connecting, remembering that we were partners. Not just roommates sharing space. Valerie had moved 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. According to Susan, who'd heard from Frank, who'd heard from someone at church, she'd reconnected with her college boyfriend and relocated to Arizona to be closer to him. She tried to corner Richard at the grocery store before she left, wanting to explain, wanting to apologize, wanting something. He'd politely but firmly wished her well and walked away. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. Susan's Christmas dinner had been different this year. I'd sat next to Richard. He'd held my hand under the table. When someone made a joke about old married couples, he'd looked at me and said, "Not old, seasoned, like a good cast iron pan." It had been corny and perfect, and I'd laughed until I cried. "Emily called this morning," Richard said now. "She wants to bring the girls for spring break. Wanted to make sure we'd be back from Ireland." "We'll be back. We're only going for 2 weeks. This time." He kissed my temple. "I'm already planning the next trip. Portugal maybe, or Scotland. One country at a time, world traveler. Hey, I've got years to make up for. Decades of not going anywhere because I was too busy being someone important." My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Mom, I love the painting you sent. Can you make one for our living room? I'll pay whatever you want." I showed Richard, smiling. "Our daughter wants to commission my art." As she should. "You're a professional now. I'm a 61-year-old woman who picked up a brush again after 30 years. You're an artist who had other priorities for a while. There's a difference." He headed for the door, then paused. "I'm making dinner tonight. That chicken marsala you like." No arguments. No arguments. After he left, I stood in my studio, and looked at the work surrounding me. 8 canvases in various stages of completion, colors and shapes and emotions made visible. Pieces of myself I'd thought were lost, now slowly being reclaimed. I picked up my brush and returned to the canvas. Outside, I could hear Richard in the kitchen, singing off-key to the oldies station he loved. The afternoon sun warmed my face. My hands, wrinkled and age-spotted as they were, still remembered how to create beauty. Valerie had asked me to give her my husband. What she hadn't understood was that he'd never been mine to give. He'd always been his own person, making his own choices, just as I was my own person. What we'd built together wasn't ownership, it was partnership. And partnerships required work and communication and the willingness to fight through the hard times instead of running away when things got difficult. She'd thought she was offering him an escape from an old life. What she'd actually been offering was a fantasy. The idea that you could run from your problems instead of facing them. That a new person could fill the holes in your soul better than doing the hard work of healing them yourself. But escape isn't the same as freedom. Escape means running from one incomplete version of yourself to another. Freedom means being fully yourself, with all your scars and fears and imperfections, and choosing to build something real anyway. I added a stroke of amber gold to my painting, then stepped back. Better. Getting closer to what I saw in my mind. My phone rang. Susan. Eleanor, I heard you're showing at the Community Art Center next month. That's wonderful. Thank you, Susan. I'm nervous, but excited. You should be excited. You're so talented. I always said so, she paused. And I wanted you to know, I'm sorry about Thanksgiving, about inviting Valerie. I had no idea she was. You couldn't have known. None of us did. Still, I feel terrible. If I'd realized, Susan. It's okay. Really. And it was. Sometimes it takes a storm to show you what's been rotting under the surface. Richard and I needed that wake-up call. We just wish it had come from somewhere less predatory. Susan laughed. That's one word for her. After I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window glass. Silver hair pulled back with a clip. No makeup. Paint on my old sweatshirt. Smile lines earned through decades of living. I looked exactly like what I was. A woman who'd weathered a storm and come out the other side still standing, still painting, still loving, still choosing the life she'd built, one ordinary day at a time. Dinner's almost ready, Richard called from the kitchen. I cleaned my brushes, covered my palette, and walked toward the sound of his voice, toward our kitchen, our table, our imperfect but chosen life together. Smells amazing, I said, sliding my arms around him from behind. Wait till you taste it. I added that wine you like to the sauce. The good wine? The very good wine. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? He turned to face me, spatula still in hand. Us. 37 years and 3 months, still standing, still choosing each other. That's not a real anniversary. It is now. I'm declaring it. He kissed me, gentle and familiar and somehow still surprising. Every day we wake up and choose this, choose us. That's worth celebrating. I looked at this man. This imperfect, scared, sometimes foolish man who'd almost let someone else define his happiness. This man who'd been brave enough to admit he was lost. This man who'd fought for us when it would have been easier to run. Valerie had asked me to give her my husband. What she'd actually given me was a gift I hadn't known I needed. A reminder that love isn't something you feel once and then coast on forever. It's something you choose. Every day. Especially on the days when it's hard. And standing there in our kitchen, dinner on the stove, Ireland 3 weeks away, and a whole life stretching out before us, I chose it. I chose him. I chose us. And that was worth more than any red dress or flattering attention or fantasy of starting over could ever be. That was worth fighting for.